Shadow Hack. Chapter 311, Energy More Potent Than Deadly Might. In fact, the transformation of the Great Sun Thunder Tyrant body muscle marrow secrets wasn't just limited to the expanding flux points and meridians. In System's words, that was just a variation which had arisen due to the nature of the source power. After fusing with the Tribulation Thunder of the Origin World, Li Yunmu had rotated it 12 times. At that time, he suddenly discovered that he could casually use the power of a Thunder Sun. Previously, it was impossible for him to achieve this feat, but now he just raised his hand toward the sky. The next instant, strands of energy separated from the Thunder Sun in his brain and, after passing through the meridians between the 72 flux points, it appeared in the hollow of his palm, congealing into a marble-sized energy bead. This energy bead was formed of blazing flame and cyan thunder. Even if it was just resting in his palm and had the size of a marble, both Li Qinghong and Demon could sense the heaven-shaking destructive power emitted by it. Li Yunmu raised one of his eyebrows and immediately shot this energy bead with his fingers. Bang! On the ground far away, terrifyingly hot shockwaves together with countless electrical sparks exploded. An enormous pressure which seemed to engulf both earth and heaven spread everywhere. When Li Qinghong and Demon looked at this scene, their pupils shrank. They became aware that after they had lost consciousness at the most critical juncture, Li Yunmu had definitely had an extremely fortuitous encounter. They were absolutely certain of this when they saw the berserk lightning flashing at the center of the explosion and sensed how extremely familiar it was. The dangerous might emitted from this apocalyptic thunder was extremely similar to that of the Thunder Tribulation. When Li Yunmu checked the results, he discovered that a hole with a diameter of 3 meters had been blasted out by the explosion. The most important thing was that the hole, which had a perimeter of 10 meters, was burnt completely black and filled with destructive energy. If this hadn't been his heavenly world where the power of the sun would automatically restore everything, then it would have become impossible for any sort of vegetation to grow in this area in the future. The characteristics of this destructive energy were completely identical to those of the tribulation cloud of world punishment. They were extremely outstanding. Frightening, is this the might of a profound cultivation method formed using the thunder tribulation from the world punishment? It must be known that this energy bead wasn't the main body of the Thunder Sun rotating around in Li Yunmu's navel, but only a little bit of energy separated from his body. Even if this little bit of energy was completely used up, the Thunder Sun could easily restore it after half a day's cultivation. In other words, this energy, which was on another level, could be said to require a whole new way of classification. It was light years apart from the flux energy in terms of quality, and it was at least a grade superior to the two types of dark flux energy which Li Yunmu possessed. It was no wonder then that the system had told him that ability points couldn't be used to advance it. This energy was simply on another level. And presently, Li Yunmu was the master of this new type of energy. Suddenly, he thought of something and took out the underworld raven sage bow. According to the method of using flux energy to congeal arrows that he had learned previously, he used the power offered by the Thunder Sun. This time, when Li Yunmu used the power of the Thunder Sun to congeal the arrow, he expanded even more strength. His forehead filled with beads of sweat after only 10 breaths had passed. Gradually, a meter-long flame thunder arrow was congealed, which was then compressed, thus completing the process. The power of the Thunder Sun was almost completely used up while congealing this flame thunder arrow. It would probably take him 2-3 days to completely restore it. After congealing the terrifying flame thunder arrow, Li Yunmu pointed the underworld raven sage bow towards the dumbstruck demon, who could clearly sense the terrifying destructive power behind the arrow. Even if it wasn't shot, Demon could sense that his life was under the strongest threat he had ever faced. This arrow can take my life. Regardless of anything, Demon was a person who had faced countless life-threatening situations. He knew his capabilities, and so he told the truth with a stiff body, fearing that if he moved carelessly, Li Yunmu might lose control over this enormously destructive energy. What if you activated the Ghost King mode? Li Yunmu asked. Demon had already fused with the ghost bloodline and had cultivated the Ghost King's body, refining secrets, so he could use the Ghost King mode. Because of this, he could resist the 66 times greater gravity. It could be said that during Ghost King mode, his body's constitution became much more formidable. No point. I can feel that as long as this arrow is shot, I will certainly die. What level of power is this? With the flame thunder arrow locked onto him, Demon's danger instinct was working on full throttle. His entire body was drenched in sweat. It is a completely new power. Perhaps the chance of becoming a deity which the quasi-deities have been searching for is also related to it. Li Yunmu obviously wouldn't shoot this arrow at his own follower. In the end, he didn't shoot it at anyone, because he had a sensation that if he really shot this arrow in his heavenly world, then the destruction wrought on upon it would be extremely heavy. Even if he had two sons who were steadily supplying energy to restore the heavenly world, a fortnight would be the minimum amount of time required to restore the damage. Impressive, too impressive. I can now understand a little why the quasi-deities haven't been able to become deities, Li Yunmu thought. He withdrew the energy of Flame Thunder Arrow back into his body. He felt that this was a case of one possessing a large number of explosives and being able to easily manufacture artillery and cannons, but being unable to research nuclear warheads using these explosives. After all, without the core, how could you understand the power of the core? After some tests, Li Yunmu gradually began to gain understanding of his newly grasped power. Then in the future, you will be known as Flame Thunder Tribulation. He formally gave a name to the power. Clearly, this was similar to the Dark Flux energy, just that it was higher level. After reaching the Flux Master level, the most significant transformation was that the person would be able to grasp deadly might. What was this deadly might? The deadly might actually used dark flux energy as the core. After absorbing a large number of dimensional crystals, the core would gradually transform, slowly substituting the ordinary flux energy and depositing it on the 72 connected flux points. This was what was known as deadly might. Frankly speaking, when the dark flux energy transformed all the flux energy at the flux points, only then it would be considered a success. This dark flux energy was the cause of a higher level power which was known as deadly might. When the entire flux energy was transformed into deadly might, this signified the person having stepped into the great circle of Nirvana layer, and them only being half a step away from becoming a flux sage. Why were Zhanbei, Devil, or even Li Qinghong forcefully restraining their cultivation to stay in the fifth dimension? This was because the grade of their energy was on a different level and they didn't have the assurance of facing flux masters after ascending to the sixth dimension. Flux energy and deadly might were two types of powers using different power sources. Just like water and ice, regardless of how much water one accumulated and used, they wouldn't be able to jolt a thick block of ice. This was the disparity between two different levels of power. And presently, the Flame Thunder Tribulation which Li Yunmu possessed was clearly an even more potent energy compared to the deadly might, which even flux sages hadn't grasped. According to his conjuncture, this energy which was even more potent than the deadly might, was one of the crucial points regarding the riddle of becoming a deity. Chapter 312, 1 against 7. After coming out of the heavenly world, Li Yunmu's strength was different in every sense of the word. Regardless of whether it was his ability to utilize world power or the newly grasped Flame Thunder Tribulation, both of them were more formidable than the ordinary flux energy from before. The only unfortunate thing was that he had accumulated a very low amount of this higher level energy which was produced after the Sun God Flame energy fused with a portion of the Tribulation Thunder and transformed. This very low amount was barely sufficient for him to congeal and compress a single arrow. As for hoping that it could be used conveniently like the ordinary flux energy from before, it could only happen when he advanced to Flux Master Realm. He wanted to substitute deadly might with Flame Thunder Tribulation and transform all of the 72 flux points into ones that could accumulate it. Only this way would he be able to gain enough Flame Thunder energy for normal use. Currently, Li Yunmu's group of 3 occupied the rightmost cave which belonged to the 9th head. The rest of the caves were divided among the 18 descenders. At this moment, the rivers of Jing and Wei had separated clearly. 1. After the past several days, Central Continent's faction, which was the largest and most powerful one, had scattered. Zhan Huia, Ji Wuxin, and Luo Tian stayed together, while Li Yunmu and his 2 followers formed another faction. As for Xiu, it was unknown what sort of method had Hai Yu and Ruyan Lanzi used, but the 2 women had surprisingly pulled Xiu to their side and become close friends. As for the single person of higher dimensional continent Lu Buletin, he had formed a faction with Northern Continent's powerful clan's successor Zhongshan Onling and one of the disciples of the 4 barbarian kings, Tyrant Jong. As for those of the desolate continent, Man Tian, Coiling Tiger as well as Mammoth Barbarian Wohang, these 3 remained together from beginning to end, forming the most united faction whose strength couldn't be neglected. The only faction which had remained unchanged was the faction of independent Fluxers. Zihanbei, Fan Kong as well as Zhao Mei stayed together the whole time. As for Men Shen, who had come together with Hai Yu from the Ocean Temple, his fate was comparatively tragic. A few nights ago, when everyone raided the 9-Dragon Cave, he died in battle. Back then, before the sneak attack, none of them thought that someone from their side might die in battle. The descenders were thus taught another lesson about the formidable constitutions of native people. Men Shen had fallen under the hands of the main leader, Black Dragon, who proved Ruyan Lanzi's worries. Although Black Dragon wasn't a flux expert and didn't possess flux energy, but relying on his strength of 9 oxen, he had cultivated 2 cultivation methods related to physical strength. One was 9 oxen punch and another was iron body refining method. Within the Fluxer community of Earth, these 2 body refining techniques could be considered as AC grade at most. In other words, they were nothing worth attention. However, when these 2 body refining cultivation methods fell into the hands of a native of the origin world who had the power of 9 oxen, they revealed a formidable might which was actually threatening to the descenders. They were 2 low-grade body refining cultivation methods, one for attack and one for defense. Relying on his terrifying physical might, Black Dragon pulled down Men Shen with him even after being sieged by Men Shen, Li Yunmu, Zihanbei, Man Tian, Zhan Huia, Coiling Tiger, and Mammoth Barbarian Wohang. There was nothing to say about it. Among the 7 of them, Men Shen had the lowest number of life-saving treasures, and so he was the one who died. That battle allowed everyone to experience that if an ordinary native who had trained his fleshly body to the peak could get any skills to complement their strength, it was extremely terrifying. The power of 9 oxen wasn't that frightening in itself, after all, it only amounted to 4.5 tons. However, if a person who already possessed a few tons of power also grasped some higher level skills to boost his strength, he could burst forth with explosive strength for a period of time, which would be absolutely frightening. Without cultivating any skills, the person could only produce the power of 10 tons in each punch. However, when the head of 9-Dragon Cave used 9 oxen punch, he could produce the power of several tens of tons with each punch. His kick had the power of nearly 100 tons. With everyone's strength, they weren't afraid of 10 tons of punching and kicking power, but when confronting the offensive power of several tens of tons or even 100 tons, they wouldn't be able to endure it. From this, the level of danger everyone faced while confronting the 9-Dragon Cave's leader could be clearly seen. If any of them ate the enemy's punch, they could easily get heavily injured and lose their combat strength. Then what to speak of if they ate a kick? In front of such terrifying offense, probably only Xiu who possessed a 3-sun heavenly world and Li Yunmu who possessed absolute defense could barely stand against this offense among the group of 18 descenders. Others, including Zihanbei and Man Tian, could only avoid the enemy's attacks. Thus, during the raid on 9-Dragon Cave a few days ago, the opponent who was only an ordinary person had broken several body-protecting jade seals of Zhan Huia and others by relying on his physical strength alone. If everyone hadn't possessed so many life-saving treasure, then maybe Men Shen wouldn't have been the only person to die. At that time, Li Yunmu again experienced the meaning of absolute power. Even a few tons of brute force could become a terrifying force if honed to the limit. After the battle, the 18 Descenders gained a new understanding of the origin world. Even though it was only the tip of the iceberg, everyone's hearts went through a couple transformations due to the experiences of the past couple days and the battle that ensued to take the cave. Among these changes, the greatest one was the one in factions. Zhan Huia, Ji Wuxin, Luo Tian, Li Yunmu, Li Qinghong, Demon, Ruin Lanzi, Xiek Yungxiu, Hai Yu, Zhongshan Onling, Lu Buletin, Tyrant Jong, Man Tian, Coiling Tiger, Mammoth Barbarian Wahang, Zihan Bei, Fan Kong, Zhao Mei. The 18 Descenders who had walked together so far broke their old alliances and formed new ones at this moment. Each person's position became more clear, and the transformation in groups this time could be considered as the Descenders breaking away from their original continent's intentions. They formed these groups in order to pursue their individual goals. These sort of alliances also implied that the benefits to their continents hadn't brought these Descenders a unanimous vision. After all, the mountain is high and the emperor is far away. 2. The influence of Earth's quasi-deities and ruling powers became increasingly more feeble as they explored their surroundings. After arriving in the origin world, individual ambitions arose within the hearts of all Descenders. Today was everyone's third day at the Nine Dragon Cave, which meant that it was Li Yunmu's squad's turn to do their job. Thus, Li Yunmu led his 2 followers and stepped out of his heavenly world, having built a cart behind closed doors. At the precise time he needed to, he arrived at the transfer channel. The news leaked by the bandits wasn't wrong. There was indeed a transfer channel at the Nine Dragon Cave, but it had been unused for several years. Reportedly, when Black Dragon discovered this cave dwelling, the transfer channel had already existed here. However, these crude people didn't have any flux energy, so they were unable to use it. Because of this, after it was occupied by the Descenders, the first thing they needed to do was to restore this transfer channel which had remained abandoned for many years. In truth, restoring it was quite simple. They only needed an enormous amount of active energy to activate it once more. Thus, everyone took turns to charge it. Chapter 313, The Finally Revealed Fangs. Master, where are we going exactly? Does that battle sage and Jing also have some connections on this side? The 3 of them took turns to charge the transfer channel. After doing it, they discovered that the time required to completely restore and activate this transfer channel would be 7-8 days at minimum, maybe even whole 15 days. Seeing that they would have to stay at Nine Dragon Cave for some time, Li Qinghong couldn't help but ask about their future. The place which Battle Sage and Jing told me about is known as Blue Moon Island. As for how many contacts she has in the origin world and what arrangements she made here, I have no idea, Li Yunmu explained while shaking his head. Actually, the chess pieces like him didn't really know much. In the past half a year, they had barely crossed the Dragon Corpse jungle and nothing more. Because the gravity of the origin world was far more terrifying than that of their Earth, and the origin world was also quite vast, traveling a long distance each day was just a delusion. Even if Li Yunmu had a formidable constitution. After adapting to the gravity of the origin world for half a year, Li Yunmu had tested this. Even when he used his full strength, he could barely cover 100 meters per 3 seconds and no more. As for ghostly evasion, although his speed wasn't influenced by the gravity of the origin world, the consumption of flux energy far surpassed what he needed on his Earth. It had risen by at least 10 folds. In other words, if Li Yunmu used ghostly evasion on his Earth, he could use it for several minutes, but here, he could barely maintain it for 20 seconds. In other words, under the natural prison of the gravity of the origin world, the abilities which the Descenders were most proud of were completely suppressed. However, as they became more and more familiar with the origin world, they gained a profound admiration towards this world. Sometimes, Li Yunmu couldn't help but think that if the quasi-deities came to this world, then to what extent would their heaven-shaking strength be suppressed? All the descenders seemed to have reached a tacit understanding to not disturb others and take turns to charge the transfer channel. After all, almost all of them had only one intention, and that was to leave this place. They were all eager to leave this place and enter the civilized area of the origin world, rather than remain trapped within this mountain range which was in the corner of the world. Days kept passing, and 13 days passed without anything happening. Then, when Zhanbei's faction had charged the transfer channel, everyone was informed that the transfer channel could finally be activated. Instantly, everyone's mind was greatly jolted. The transfer channel being activatable implied that they could finally leave this wretched mountain range. Everyone, take care of yourself, we will be leaving first. If in the future we meet each other, then let's use the 55th imprint to secretly contact each other. Leading Xiaomei and Fan Kong, Zhanbei activated the transfer channel without waiting for anyone and vanished from everyone's vision. When Li Yunmu looked at Zhang Huia, he could see a hint of concealed killing intent flicker through his eyes. Although he hid it quickly, it still couldn't escape Li Yunmu's keen senses. However, Zhanbei, being the former most powerful person of the fifth dimension, wasn't easy to deal with. Furthermore, he had with him the unknown Fan Kong and Xiaomei whose strength also wasn't lacking. Thus, Zhang Huia didn't decide to attack them. During his moment of hesitation, Zhanbei led his faction and left through the transfer channel. Perhaps Zhanbei's group of 3 was also aware that being the only rogue fluxers in the group of descenders they had to leave quickly. As for when they met each other in the future, Zhanbei was convinced that he wouldn't need to fear the opponent's combat strength. From this instant, everyone had the same starting line whether they were disciples of transcending powers or rogue fluxers. Without a superior background, these so-called disciples of transcending powers wouldn't have any advantage. We will also leave. We will be going to Eastfield 8 Island Mountains. If the opportunity comes, we will meet each other. The second faction to leave was the Intercontinental Alliance of Zhongshan Onling, Lu Buletin, and Tyrant Jong. Although they had some background, but compared to others' factions, they were relatively weak. Thus Zhongshan Onling's group of 3 didn't hesitate to inform everyone that they were leaving. But at this moment, Mammoth Barbarian Wahang stepped forward, near the transfer channel, blocking the 3 of them from activating it. You 2 can go, but he won't go anywhere, he said while pointing towards Tyrant Jong. Mantian and Coiling Tiger also faintly pressurized them. Today, a crack hidden deep was finally revealed by the group of descenders who had been taking precautions against each other from the start. Internal strifes were everywhere indeed. Li Yunmu didn't know why the other 3 of the 4 disciples of Barbarian Kings kicked Tyrant Jong out, but he could see a few things clearly. After all, only Tyrant Jong wasn't a descendant of a Barbarian King. He had been taken in as disciple by one and hadn't expected that because of this fact, he would be viewed as an enemy by the other 3. Don't be excessive. If you want to keep Tyrant Jong behind, then I can guarantee that this transfer channel won't be able to remain intact. At this time, Zhongshan Onling stepped forward and revealed proper authority as the leader of a faction. Lu Buletin also took a step forward. A thick pressure rose from his body, fighting against the 3 barbarians. There was no way for them to retreat at this moment. Only by going all out would they have a chance. After remaining silent for a long time, Tyrant Jong said while looking at the 3, beginning from today, I sever all relations with Desolate Continent. If you want to keep me behind, then I can stay, but I won't be restricted. When Ji Wuxin saw things getting out of hand, she hurriedly spoke up to stop the brewing fight. Okay then, everyone has come from the same earth. This isn't the time for internal strife. Mantian, even if you use force to break the melon from the vine, it won't taste sweet. Let them go. Good, Desolate Continent's traitor. We will wait and see if you can make your name in the 8 Island Mountains. Coiling Tiger's killing intent kept rising, but in the end, he was forced to suppress it. Even if he didn't want to suppress it, he had to, because the reaction from Zhongshan Onling's group was too fierce. If they really fought, then whether Tyrant Jong died or not, everyone was clear that the first thing to break would be the transfer channel behind him. This was the reason why Ji Wuxin had jumped forward to mediate the situation. Without the transfer channel, none of them had the certainty that they would be able to reach their destination in a short amount of time, given the powerful gravity and the vastness of the origin world. This wasn't a price anyone was willing to pay, and the three barbarians also hadn't expected that Zhongshan Onling and Lu Buletin would be so determined to defend Tyrant Jong. Thus, after Ji Wuxin gave them a way out, the three barbarians quickly retreated. Finally, Tyrant Jong's group of three entered the transfer channel and left, without saying a word. "Everyone, we will also leave. I, Qingxiu, and Lan Zi will be going to Kirkland Manor in the south," Hai Yu, who lead the two other girls, informed everyone. This time, no one stopped them. Even if Zhang Wei was looking at Xie Qingxiu with a resentful expression, the other was together with Hai Yu and Ruyan Lan Zi. "Take care of yourself," Hai Yu said to everyone, but for some reason, Li Yunmu felt that this line was meant for him. "You should also leave quickly. Don't be careless." At this time, Xie Qingxiu's voice transmission reached Li Yunmu's ears. Her voice transmission at this instant revealed that she certainly possessed a three-sun heavenly world. Otherwise, for a secret voice transmission, she would have needed to be in Nirvana layer. Clearly Xie Qingxiu was far from attaining this level and could have only accomplished this with the help of world power. Li Yunmu nodded towards her, without any change in his expression to indicate that he had received her goodwill. Perhaps since they were both rookies from the same heavenly cloud city, Xie Qingxiu had felt that she needed to warn him. After Hai Yu's group left, the situation became somewhat weird. Mammoth, Barbarian, Wohang and the other 5 people looked towards Li Yunmu together. Coiling Tiger's group even moved forward slightly to cover the transfer channel behind their back. Chapter 314, The Punch of 9 Shadows. Li Yunmu, that conflict from half a year ago will be settled now. The first to speak was Mammoth, Barbarian, Wohang. Li Yunmu hadn't expected that he would still remember that matter from half year ago when he was stopped outside the death zone. Naturally, the situation wasn't so simple. This was only an excuse and nothing more. If they didn't use this excuse, they couldn't conceal their shame. The 3 barbarians as well as Zhang Wei's group, how could they miss such an excuse? "Oh, so you will come by yourself to settle it, or will all 3 of you come?" Facing them, Li Yunmu didn't seem the slightest bit worried. If it had been 10 days ago, then perhaps he would have had some apprehensions about the hidden trump cards of these people. But now that he possessed Flame Thunder Tribulation in a 2-sun heavenly world, he had the confidence to fight with everyone standing in front of him. "Haha, do you still think that you'll be able to leave this place today?" Mammoth, Barbarian Wohang's expression flickered once, revealing a hint of a malicious smile. He hadn't replied to Li Yunmu's question, but it was clear either way that the 3 disciples of Barbarian Kings would attack together. If they didn't do so, then it wouldn't matter, but once they attacked, they would have to take Li Yunmu's life. "Don't tell me you want to attack the people of the same continent." At this time, Li Yunmu looked at Zhang Wei, Ji Wuxin and Luo Tian. In reply, the 3 of them sneered towards him. "Don't blame me, I already gave 3 chances to you," Ji Wuxin said indifferently. Zhang Wei suddenly looked at Li Yunmu and said, "Huan Baikan was my friend and also our ally. From the instant you killed him, you became an enemy of our 3 continents alliance." Li Yunmu hadn't known that Central Continent, Northern Continent and Desolate Continent had formed an alliance. At this instant, Zhang Wei seemed to already consider him as a dead person, thus he didn't hesitate to reveal this final secret. Unfortunately, Li Yunmu had taken the initiative before and, using the restrictions of the terrain to his advantage, killed Frontline Heaven's Huan Baikan right away. Because of this, the group's plans had failed, and the alliance only had the forces of 2 continents. In fact, they hadn't planned to let the descenders of any other power to leave the transfer channel, but this had failed because they had been missing Huan Baikan. Because Man Tian and Zhang Hui's group hadn't been able to obtain the dominance of absolute strength, they had to allow Zi Hanbei, Lu Buletin as well as Ruin Lanzi to leave. So this is how it is. No wonder the good relationship between you and Hai Yu seemed to have gone sour in the past few days, Li Yunmu suddenly said. At this moment, he finally understood why Man Tian and Hai Yu, who previously had a very close relationship, had been apart from each other the past few days. Clearly, she already knew about their secret alliance. She had even instigated Zhongshan Onling, Xie and Tyrant Jong to make sure that they also didn't enter an alliance with these people. Otherwise, even if they had lost Huan Baikan, the whole situation would have still been completely under their control with the addition of Zhongshan Onling, Xie and Tyrant Jong. If their plan had been implemented successfully, higher dimensional continent, ocean temple as well as rogue cultivators would have been completely annihilated. Then in the future, only 3 of the original 6 transcending powers in the world would have remained as time passed, and they would have finally unified the world. Li Yunmu wasn't clear about the plans and schemes of quasi-deities, but he knew that all this wasn't related to him. What he wanted to know the most was why Battle Sage Vega had nurtured him secretly as her representative. What angle was she playing exactly? According to logic, he was clearly part of the central continent, yet she had sent Battle Sage and Jing to represent the mysterious Li sect on the Black Dragon Island. Thus, although he was a part of the central continent, Zhang Hui and the others had never viewed him as their ally. If Ji Wuxin hadn't personally seen him burst forth with explosive physical strength, she would have never extended the olive branch to him a couple times. He was clearly viewed by Ji Wuxin as Fan Kong or Zhao Mei, this sort of rogue fluxer. After he thought everything through, he began to smile. His smile was a little bit eccentric and looked completely weird. What are you laughing at? Zhang Hui asked while looking indifferently at Li Yunmu like he was seeing a dead person. I'm smiling at your ignorance and helplessness, Li Yunmu said bluntly. You're ignorant, unaware of the extent of my master's power, yet still think that victory is in your grasp, Li Qinghong said while looking indifferently at everyone. You're helpless chess pieces, but you don't have the slightest understanding of how to be a chess piece. You all believe that you are the masters of everything, Demon said while shaking his head. The next instant, everyone saw Li Yunmu leaping forward. His speed wasn't quick. Under the suppression of the origin world's gravity, his actions were clearly visible to everyone. But Zhang Hui's group was just as slow. Heavens were fair, so under the harsh environment of the origin world, the gravity's effect wouldn't be lessened just because one was a disciple of some *T power. Therefore, when Li Yunmu suddenly took action in a slow manner, the reaction of Zhang Hui and the others was just as slow. Given the concealed strength and trump cards of these people, Li Yunmu did not dare to call himself the most formidable, but in terms of fleshly body, they couldn't compare to him. In fact, Li Yunmu knew well how formidable his corporeal body was. 9 Dragon Caves leader who was viewed as the peak power of fleshly body possessed the power of 9 oxen, but Li Yunmu was definitely far more terrifying compared to him. According to the system's data, the strength of Li Yunmu's flesh was around 10 tons. This stat didn't include his strength when bursting forth with full power like when he activated the power of the Great Heart. If Li Yunmu used his full strength, then his formidable fleshly body coupled with the Great Heart's 5 major transformations and skills like Spirit Pincer Rip technique would surpass 100 tons. This was the reason why he had previously exploited the fact that their flux power was suppressed at Dragon's Tail and torn apart Huan Baikan. The only ones who had seen that were Hai Yu and Ji Wuxin. However, since they were certain to deal with him, it meant that he wouldn't be able to suppress them just by relying on the strength of his flesh. After all, the origin world also had rich flux energy. This was the reason why Ji Wuxin, who knew about Li Yunmu's fierce strength, had dared to remain behind. Li Yunmu now understood everything. Men Shen clearly died with the help of these people. Man Tian, Zhang Hui, and their groups had held back their strength so Men Shen would die to weaken Hai Yu's power. But Li Yunmu wasn't Men Shen or Hai Yu. He would rather have a full-out frontal fight with them than play games. When attacking, Li Yunmu burst forth with full power. Not only did he activate his Great Heart mode, but also used Spirit Pincer Step, and both of his arms immediately became thicker than his entire body. While in this situation, he punched at Zhang Wei first. The strength of this punch definitely surpassed 100 tons. Compared to a fast-moving truck, its momentum was even more terrifying. But this wasn't just one punch, but rather 9 punches. Although the 9 of them weren't combined into one, so their strength reached 900 tons, but it was little different when 9 continuous punches rained down. Bang, 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 bang. Against Li Yunmu's sudden offense using Spirit Pincer Step, Zhang Wei could only cross his arms in front of his chest to obstruct the blows. However, only when he sensed the inner workings of this punch did he understand that this wasn't just a single ordinary punch. Chapter 315, The Foundation of the Three Barbarians. Until today, no one knew that the power of 8 shadows was accumulated within Li Yunmu's one punch. This was the biggest difference between him and Men Shen or others present in the 9-Dragon Cave. This was also the reason why Li Yunmu had strengthened his heart 5 times. After all, each time it became more formidable, Li Yunmu would become 9 times more formidable. After activating the 5 times strengthened heart, its every throb was like a clap of thunder. Enormous amount of blood was being used to strengthen the flesh in his body, instantly making him much more formidable. At that moment, Li Yunmu had completely transformed into a human-shaped T-Rex. His height increased to 2.3 meters from the original 1.8 meters. After activating the Great Tearing technique, his arms had swelled disproportionately compared to his body and resembled a pair of enormous pincers. None of the enemies, including Zhang Wei or Man Tian, were weak. As soon as Li Yunmu displayed his ferociousness, they felt a terrifying threat from him, and their pupils narrowed. They had indeed greatly underestimated their opponent. Bang! A fierce explosion echoed within the 9-Dragon Cave. Li Yunmu fiercely launched his attack, his fist heavily slamming into Zhang Wei, and the arrogant disciple of War God Temple was blown away as if he had been hit by a missile. Man Tian and the others hadn't been unaffected, either. They were forced to retreat under the shockwaves of Li Yunmu's punch. Just one punch completely astonished the party from desolate and central continents. They stabilized themselves only with great difficulty as shock and astonishment spread across their faces. The power of Li Yunmu's punch had been unimaginably excessive, it was similar to a missile. No, even if a missile had slammed into them, it wouldn't have been so terrifying. When Man Tian and the others looked at Li Yunmu at this moment, they recalled their joint battle against the leader of the 9-Dragon Cave, and the nobody before them seemed like a countless times more powerful version of that leader. Cough, cough 9 layers of power, impossible, how could your flesh burst forth with such terrifying power? Cough, cough. Zhang Wei stood up with the support of Man Tian and the others. Just with this one punch, this top disciple of War God Temple was injured to the extent of coughing up mouthfuls of blood. If not for Man Tian and the others supporting him and resolving the remnant power of the punch in his body, his present condition wouldn't be much better than that of Huan Baikan back then. Li Yunmu still felt slightly disappointed, since the punch hadn't produced the expected result. Unfortunately, this place wasn't Dragon's Tail, so the flux energy of his opponents wasn't suppressed. Otherwise, Zhang Wei would have been done for. We really can't let you leave this place. Everyone, seems like we need to attack without any reservations. Coiling Tiger howled fiercely. His body began to swell quickly, and his clothes were soon left in tatters. A projection of Hell Tiger appeared behind his body, and instantly, his threatening aura reached its peak. After he had stimulated the bloodline of ancient devil Hell Tiger, a king crystal armor emitting 12 lights covered his body. In the blink of an eye, Coiling Tiger had unleashed his bloodline and seemed to have become a completely different person compared his original looks. A faint bloodthirsty aura was being emitted from his body. At this instant, Li Yunmu felt as if he was being watched by an ancient devil hell tiger, and all the hairs on his body stood up. 12 Light King Crystal Armor. This was the first time that Li Yunmu experienced a 12 Rainbow Light King Crystal Armor of another person. Compared to his own, without any rainbow lights congealed, this was clearly more powerful. After all, his opponent had already congealed 4 rainbow lights. In other words, he possessed 4 times higher flux energy reserves compared to Li Yunmu, while the maximum flux energy he could utilize was also many times higher. It isn't only you who has congealed a 12 Rainbow Light King Crystal Armor. Instantly, Mammoth Barbarian Wang callously looked at Li Yunmu and activated his blood. The projection of an enormous giant appeared behind him, and his body also began to swell, reaching the height of 3 meters. Compared to Coiling Tiger's 2.5 meter height, he was even taller. Clearly, Mammoth Barbarian Wang's bloodline was the inheritance of Mammoth Barbarian King. A 12 Rainbow Light King Crystal Armor covered his whole body. He had also surprisingly congealed 4 rainbow lights, just like Coiling Tiger. When Li Yunmu saw this, he sighed in his heart. When all was said and done, the time he had spent cultivating was just too short. Although he had obtained a king's true territory, he didn't have enough time to utilize it to improve his strength and build a firm base for himself. Li Yunmu didn't feel the slightest bit of astancy by seeing the 3 descendants of barbarian kings possessing 12 Rainbow Light King Crystal Armor. After all, if these people didn't have the resources to accomplish this feat, then who on earth would have? At this time, Man Tian also activated his bloodline with a complicated expression. This was the first time that he revealed the form of his bloodline. The projection of a barbarian god emitting barbarous aura appeared behind him, and even Li Yunmu felt a hint of familiarity with it. This was surprisingly similar to the barbarian god that had appeared behind the dwarf witch king. But here, the barbarous aura was far higher and purer compared to what he had sensed back then, giving a sensation that no living being could look at it. Barbarian god's bloodline, Man Tian, you surprisingly obtained the inheritance of the first level of barbarian shrine. Luo Tian cried out in surprise at this time. Clearly, he also hadn't known that Man Tian had concealed himself so deeply. Each of the 4 barbarian kings stood guard at one corner of the desolate continent, and there were 4 heavenly kings of the barbarian shrine. Theoretically, all the descendants of these 4 had equal opportunity to obtain barbarian god's bloodline, and it had always been part of the internal struggle among the 3 barbarians. But at this moment, it showed up that Man Tian had already emerged as the victor. After all, he had already fused with the bloodline of barbarian god. If he was successful in obtaining the inheritance of the second level as well, then in the future, he could merge with devil barbarian god's bloodline. As for how much blood of the true barbarian god was stored in the 3rd level, that was unknown. But even so, Man Tian merging with the bloodline of barbarian god completely shocked the people of the central continent. Bang! 5 pillars of rainbow lights erupted toward the heaven. Man Tian had surprisingly congealed 5 rainbow lights, which was 1 more compared to Coiling Tiger and Mammoth Barbarian Wang. The halo of the King Crystal Armor began to circulate around him, and at the center of it, a battle armor with the halo of the 6th dimension took shape. This was clearly a transcendent level battle armor. Chapter 316, Li Qinghong steps to the top. Even though Li Qinghong and Demon had fused 8 Rainbow Light Devil King Crystal Armor with 5th Dimensional Armor, the difference was simply of heaven and earth. Regardless of whether it was the 12 Rainbow Light Crystal Armor or Transcendent Level Armor, it was 1 level above those of Li Qinghong and Demon. This was the true foundation, the foundation of 4 barbarian kings. Regardless of what means Li Yunmu used to nurture his 4 followers, it was impossible for him to surpass the 4 barbarian kings. Him being able to nurture his followers to the level of overlords was already something to be proud of. Come, I don't believe that you can still escape from our clutches. Zhang Wei kept coughing blood as if his life was going to end, but then, he took out a small bottle, as did Ji Wuxin. When the 3 barbarians saw them do that, a hint of astonishment appeared on their faces. They hadn't anticipated that a trifling rookie disciple who hadn't even cultivated for long time would be able to force them to reveal their trump cards as well as get the people of War God Temple to use War God's blood. Once Zhanhua and Ji Wuxin drank a drop of blood, the threatening aura emitted from their bodies became a lot more concentrated, and a profound presence spread out around them. According to legend, the War God's blood was a specially refined blood essence taken from the War God. A drop of that blood essence would allow a fluxer to enter a quasi-battle mode which would last for roughly an hour. It couldn't directly upgrade the cultivation of the person who drank it, but it could substantially upgrade their combat strength. The blood essence would use all the insights gained during battle to allow the user to enter a unique state. Although the person wouldn't be a match for War God's unflawed realm, they would be able to display 100% of their combat strength during battle. In other words, they would reach a very high level in terms of combat. At the same time, their crystal armor and a set of 6th dimensional armor also appeared on their bodies. They didn't have a 12 Rainbow Light King crystal armor, just a 4 Rainbow Light Phantom King armor. However, their 4 Rainbow Lights had already been solidified. After seeing this, the expressions of Demon and Li Qinghong became slightly better. Apparently not even heavenly talents could casually congeal 12 Rainbow Light crystal armor. Compared to the descendants of the 4 barbarian kings, the 2 disciples of War God Temple Zhanhua and Ji Wuxin clearly didn't have sufficiently tyrannical presence. After all, their companions were direct descendants of barbarian kings, and each barbarian king only needed to nurture one of them, while War God Temple nurtured a group of reserve disciples. Reportedly, the number of disciples in the current generation amounted to 36. Zhanhua and Ji Wuxin were the 2 who had obtained seniority over others, but that was it. Seeing this, Li Yunmi remembered the time when he had been invited to join War God Temple. If at the time he hadn't joined Battle Sage Vega's faction, he probably would have become just another member of the temple's current generation of disciples. When he thought about it now, he clearly felt that it was totally not worth it. After all, the amount of geniuses being nurtured by War God Temple was great, so he wouldn't be able to obtain all the resources just by himself. I will keep a watch at the back. Without anything else said, Luo Tian slowly retreated. He stopped in front of the transfer channel to guard it cautiously. In the meantime, the 3 barbarians, Zhanhua and Ji Wuxin, tried to pressure Li Yunmu. By then, this group of disciples of transcending powers had finally used some of their trump cards. If they had used these tactics during the siege of Nine Dragon Cave half a month ago, then it would have been impossible for the bandits' leader persevere for a moment, let alone drag Men Shen down with him. It has to be said that during that night's raid, Li Yunmi wasn't the only one to hide his strength. All the other participants were the same. By that time, Li Yunmu had seen a portion of the trump cards held by his opponents, but he didn't feel the slightest bit of fear. The only apprehension he had was from the unknown. Bloodlines, King Crystal Armor, War God's Blood, 6th Dimensional Armor, each of them could substantially increase a person's strength. What's more, the 3 barbarians had chosen the same path as Li Yunmu during the 5 times strengthening. They had also strengthened their heart zone 5 times, and their 12 Rainbow Light King crystal armor had also been equivalently strengthened, thus pulling down Li Yunmu's absolute dominance regarding corporeal body. Perhaps the only field in which Li Yunmu maintained his superiority was in the strength of his cultivation technique being a level higher compared to those of the 3 barbarians. After all, even if they prioritized cultivating their corporeal bodies, they wouldn't possess such a hegemonic cultivation method as Great Sun Thunder Tyrant Body Muscle Marrow Secrets. Not to mention that Li Yunmu still cultivated Devil Dragon Bone Refining Secrets, which strengthened every part of his body. It improved his flesh and bones, and even the 5 viscera and 6 bowels. At this time, Li Qinghong and Demon also finally revealed their concealed strength. Both of them congealed their 8 Rainbow Light Devil King armor, pushing their strength to the next step. When Zhanhua and Ji Wuxin witnessed this, their complexions turned unsightly. They had never expected that even Li Yunmu's followers would have congealed King Crystal armor, and even Devil King level, which was a level higher compared to their own. Unfortunately, it's no use. Without congealing any rainbow lights, it is just a crystal armor with somewhat more formidable defense and nothing more, Zhang Wei sneered. You have really found a king's true territory within Moro Mountain Tenebrous hidden domain. Ji Wuxin asked with a mysterious expression, but Li Yunmu didn't respond. This didn't stop her from laughing, though. Unfortunately, the descending event came too suddenly. If you had been allowed to strengthen your foundation for 2 or 3 years, then your followers would probably have become formidable enemies for us. Her words caught the attention of Coiling Tiger and the others. A king's true territory? Who knows how many years had it been since one had shown up, and surprisingly it fell into the hands of this kind of person. They knew that if a small family on Earth secretly came into possession of a king's true territory, then in 10 years or a maximum of 100 years if its members were slow it would become a large clan which could influence a whole continent. Previously, the ancestor of Gongshan clan had discovered a king's true territory 100 years ago, and because of that, his family was able to rise to a domineering position. Even today the other clans of northern continent couldn't rise above it. It was no wonder then that Li Yunmu's followers had become such freaks. But after Li Qinghong's howl, Ji Wuxin couldn't smile anymore. Once Li Qinghong faintly turned her head upwards, and a projection of Sun God Bird appeared behind her body. An orange-colored flame surrounded her body and slowly fused with the Devil King armor. Slowly, it then transformed into a set of gorgeous battle armor, Phoenix battle armor. At this instant, Li Qinghong seemed to have transformed into a female battle god. Her body was covered in flaming battle armor, she held the frightening imperial spear in her hand, and flames burned the ground wherever she stepped. The aura exuded by her gave others a feeling of being next to something extremely hot, as if they were standing in front of an erupting volcano. Phoenix battle armor? You completely refined the most precious founding treasure of Chao Tian sect. Once Ji Wuxin and the others saw Li Qinghong's transformation, they were all extremely startled. Chapter 317, Nirvana Grass. Phoenix battle armor? You completely refined the most precious founding treasure of Chao Tian sect. Once Ji Wuxin and the others saw Li Qinghong's transformation, they were all extremely startled. Yes, after I cleared the 70th level of the Tower of Glory, I used all the tower badges I had saved up in the past 5 years to exchange for one item. It refined the undying sage blood in my blood earlier than expected. At this moment, Li Qinghong seemed to have transformed into another person, and for the first time, the disciples of the transcending powers began to view her as an opponent. There was an enormous difference when comparing her previous situation to her current one. Before, she had only used her compatible body constitution to operate the undying sage blood, while currently, she had refined the undying sage blood. Presently, Sun God Bird's undying sage blood had been completely absorbed by her blood, unlike when she could only draw passive support from it. Thus, the difference between the two situations could be clearly seen. She had finally become an opponent on the same level as the group, or perhaps even stronger, able to suppress them. Li Qinghong's talent and willpower were astonishing by themselves. With the frightening imperial spear in her hand, she had been rampaging through the 5th dimension for a long time. The only thing she lacked was a foundation and nothing more. And after meeting Li Yunmu, she had obtained that strong foundation. It was then clear that she had taken so long to arrive to the continental battle was only because she was busy refining the undying sage blood within the Tower of Glory. Moreover, she had used all the tower badges she had saved up to curtail the difference between her and the proud sons and daughters of heavens. This sort of astonishing willpower caused everyone to sigh in admiration. They asked themselves how many people in this world could patiently endure the enticement of immediately increasing their strength by using tower badges to wait for 5 years to exchange for a single item. The item which Li Qinghong had obtained within the Tower of Glory was called Nirvana Grass. Its value was nearly 1,500 tower badges. It was highly expensive, but had little usage. The body of the person who swallowed Nirvana grass would undergo Nirvana 99 times in a day. Under ordinary circumstances, only people who had been infected by extremely potent poison would use something like that. After using Nirvana grass and undergoing Nirvana 90 times within a day, then regardless of how potent the poison was, it would be resolved. However, Li Qinghong had had a different idea for Nirvana grass. She wanted to thoroughly nurture the undying sage blood in her body by undergoing Nirvana 99 times. This would help her to completely refine it. This was actually a large gamble which used her life as a stake, but she came out victorious in the end. By relying on her firm resolve and astonishing willpower, she had undergone the 99 nirvanas and fused the undying sage blood with her body. Ji Wuxin, your opponent is me. Allow me to let you experience the power of undying Sun God Bird's bloodline. Li Qinghong pointed her frightening imperial spear towards Ji Wuxin, and the killing intent on the spear's tip locked on the target. At this instant, Ji Wuxin finally felt pressured. Her opponent had actually used the undying sage blood to congeal a complete phoenix battle armor. A person who had refined their bloodline to this extent was almost an impossibility. Reportedly, the only other person who had accomplished this feat was the present Blade Master of Bloodwood. According to rumors, Blade Master had thoroughly comprehended the true essence of Heavenly Blade, so he could congeal blade energy armor and use a blade to destroy everything. In other words, he was the only person in the world who had the power to contend against Battle God without relying on the 5 supreme battlesuits. From this, it could be understood just how terrifying Bladewood's Blade Master was. As for Li Qinghong, she had depended upon the high compatibility of her body as well as her strong willpower to undergo 99 nirvanas without her soul being extinguished and formed an armor congealed from her bloodline. She was the second person to accomplish this feat. Compared to Blade Master's formless and characterless blade energy armor, she was clearly inferior, but even then, such a person like her hadn't appeared on Earth and everything was just a theory. Li Qinghong had actually accomplished such a feat. At this instant, not only Ji Wuxin, but even Man Tian and the others were looking at Li Yunmu and Li Qinghong with grave expressions. Originally, they had only felt threatened by Li Yunmu, but currently, they were faced with another person to worry about. Good, it's really good. It's clear now that we definitely cannot let you go. Fortunately you weren't given the time to grow, otherwise, if some time had passed, there really wouldn't be anyone who could suppress the two of you. Zhang Huiya took a deep breath, and instantly, apart from Luo Tian who was still guarding the transfer channel, the 5 of them displayed an astonishing mutual understanding. Me and Wuxin will deal with Li Qinghong, so Li Yunmu will be your responsibility. Attack! By then, the 5 were no longer interested in probing the other's strength anymore. Previously, when they had slowly surrounded Li Yunmu, they believed that they could slowly attack him and draw out his hidden trump cards. Besides, whether it was the people of the Central or the Desolate Continent, all of them believed that Li Yunmu's 2 followers were only side characters. However, the situation currently was very different. Li Qinghong was actually a person who was bound to rise in the future, so they wanted to use this opportunity to exterminate the 2 sprouts who were maturing very quickly. Bang, bang, bang. Sure enough, the 5 of them didn't have any more apprehensions or fears. Man Tian, Coiling Tiger, and Mammoth Barbarian Wohang immediately activated their 5 times strengthened hearts. When the 4 huge hearts began to throb simultaneously, it was as if a thunderous drum was being beaten at a special rhythm within the 9 Dragon Cave. Under this situation, few would be able to last. If any ordinary descenders were in the area of the battle, they wouldn't be able to bear the powerful throbbing of the 4 large hearts and suffer internal injuries. When Man Tian's group activated their 5 times strengthened hearts, their complexions changed, and their strength changed in a visible manner. Yet they suddenly realized that even though their side had 3 people who had activated their great heart, they were still unable to suppress the powerful throbbing of Li Yunmu's strengthened heart. The throbs of Li Yunmu's heart were even more powerful and stable compared to theirs, and was filled with enormous bursting power. In an instant, Man Tian's group became aware of the reason why Zhang Wei had taken the initiative to join hands Ji Wuxin and deal with only Li Qinghong. They realized that Zhang Wei's battle intent had actually collapsed under Li Yunmu's one punch. After personally receiving an attack, he was the person who most clearly understood that Li Yunmu was far more terrifying than they had expected. But by then, Man Tian's group didn't have the spare time to have any other thoughts. The three of them finished their preparations and rushed over with all their power. This was the collision of Flux disciples with the most powerful flesh bodies on earth. Currently, Li Yunmu didn't know the limit of his strength, but he was not afraid. Instantly unleashing Spirit Pincer Step, he began to battle with Man Tian and the others. Chapter 318, Tearing Apart a Barbarian. Bang, 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 bang. Li Yunmu exchanged more than 10 fists with the three opponents at high speed, with fists falling one after another on everyone's bodies. The two sides were fighting at their fiercest. In this one exchange, their area of battle was filled with rocks and sand flying everywhere. Mammoth Barbarian Wahang, who had transformed into a 3-meter-tall giant, heavily slammed his fist toward Li Yunmu, but Li Yunmu dodged it, and the fist fell upon the stone wall behind him. Instantly, under the several tens of tons of offensive power, the pitiful stone was grinned into dust and completely disintegrated. In a split second, Li Yunmu used his Spirit Pincer Step and 5th-level Insect Step to battle against the joint offense of the three opponents, relying only on his own power. Bang! Something shattered again. For a minute, Li Yunmu took Coiling Tiger and Man Tian's numerous strong punches in succession. When the enormous several tens of tons of power hit his ribs and waist, his flesh was shaken up. He couldn't completely dissipate the power of the two fists and was blown into a cave wall like an artillery shell. The next instant though, Li Yunmu's two arms fiercely expanded, looking like they had transformed into a pair of enormous pincers. Since his body was stuck in the cave's wall, his two arms went at the wall, tearing down large slabs of stone in succession. He was tearing a stone wall apart with his bare arms. When Luo Tian, who had been standing at the rear, saw Li Yunmu transform into a human-shaped monsters, his pupils narrowed. Although he had abundant knowledge and experience, he had never seen a creature whose corporeal body could reach this degree. Come, let's fight again. Bang! At this instant, Li Yunmu stamped his feet heavily and shot toward the group of three like a missile. The battle instantly resumed, with sparks flying everywhere. The more the three barbarians battled, the more apprehensive they felt. This was so even if after activating the 5 times strengthened heart, they had pulled the difference down by a great margin. After all, the people of Desolate Continent focused on using their bloodline to strengthen their bodies. Since they were the descendants of 3 barbarian kings, their flesh was among the toughest among the Flux disciples on earth. Currently, their only fear was that after every 3 minutes, Li Yunmu's pair of enormous pincers would come out again. The thing they worried about was naturally the Spirit Pincer Rib, which had become extremely terrifying after being matched by the tyrannical physical power. All of Li Yunmu's killing intent burst forth at that moment. From the start, the 3 barbarians had been cooperating with each other in both defense and offense. Currently, they were simply waiting for the opponent to weaken before bursting forth to finish him off. However, Li Yunmu's abnormal defense became an headache for them. Even after several minutes had passed of this earth-shattering battle, Li Yunmu was yet to fall. Even after eating tens of punches and kicks, he was surprisingly still able to hold on. What sort of defense was this? The power erupting from each kick of the 3 barbarians was equivalent to the weight of 50 tons, while their punches could be compared to 30 tons offensive power. It was astonishing for the youth to hold his own against that. They were simply unable to take down Li Yunmu. At this instant, the 3 barbarians suddenly became fearful for their lives. Impossible! Even if a human could possess such terrifying defensive strength, how could his internal organs withstand such terrifying offensive might? To their horror, however, Li Yunmu was able to endure it. Compared to that, after receiving his punches, each of which had the power of several tens of tons, and kicks, which had the power surpassing 70 tons, the three barbarians were in a much worse situation. Even if they had also activated their 5 times strengthened heart, even if they also possessed a 12 rainbow light crystal armor, even if they possessed a 6th dimensional battle armor, they were forced to retreat again and again when faced with Li Yunmu's terrifying strength. The only person able to endure Li Yunmu's unreasonable attacks was Man Tian, who possessed the bloodline of Barbarian God. After the three of them had been fighting against Li Yunmu for 15 minutes, Coiling Tiger suddenly discovered that of the original 4 rainbow lights on his crystal armor, only 2 remained. What did the disappearance of 2 rainbow lights mean? This implied that if Coiling Tiger hadn't congealed 4 rainbow lights and used his flux energy to resist against Li Yunmu's attack, then his 12 rainbow light crystal armor would have been shattered twice already. On the other side, although Li Yunmu hadn't congealed any rainbow lights for his king crystal armor, it was still holding strong. Only the body protecting cover of rainbow light had weakened greatly because of the attacks received. His king crystal armor won't be able to endure for long, we must not give him any chance to take a breath. Once we shatter his king crystal armor, we'll be able to break his tortoise shell, Mammoth Barbarian Wahang howled out crazily. At this instant, the 3 barbarians were genuinely shocked and wished to howl from the bottom of their hearts. Li Yunmu's abnormal defense had greatly frightened them. It cast a shadow over their hearts, and they couldn't get rid of it. Only after facing a person like Li Yunmu did they clearly understand how scary was a person who possessed terrifying strength as well as an even more terrifying defense. Since they had dealt with the leader of 9 Dragon Cave, they could well understand the danger posed by a punch filled with enormous power of several tens of tons. But 9 Dragon Cave's leader's corporeal body could be broken, he wasn't without weak points. Li Yunmu, on the other hand, was simply a monster. Not only did he possess formidable defense, even the toughness of his internal organs was quite startling. Naturally, they didn't know that he possessed the Devil Dragon Bone armor which could specifically boost the defenses of his internal organs. The descendants of the barbarian kings, you are all just so-so. If this little bit of strength is all you have, then I'll be greatly disappointed. The next instant, Li Yunmu increased his power once more. If previously he was only using the combined might of 3 shadows and thus produced an attack filled with 4 layers of energy, then currently he added the power of 1 more shadow to the combined might of the 3 shadows. This transformation produced results almost immediately. Before, using their rainbow lights, crystal armor, dimensional battle armor, and bloodline strength, the 3 barbarians were able to receive the 4-layered energy attacks. But right then, after the addition of 1 more shadow, each of Li Yunmu's attacks possessed 5 layers of energy. When he launched another attack at Mammoth Barbarian Wahang, the latter immediately sensed something different. He resisted the several tens of tons of power from the first 4 layers of energy, but when he believed that the attack had ended, the 5th layer of energy rushed toward him like a torrential wave. Thud! He anxiously howled out, but the moment he thought to respond to the 5th layer of energy, he could sense that there was no more time. This final layer of energy not only exploded his fists, but, with incomparable accuracy, exploded at the position of his great heart. Despite him possessing rainbow lights, a king crystal armor as well as the 6th dimensional battle armor, they couldn't exhaust the surplus energy of this 5th layer of energy. Mammoth Barbarian Wahang also didn't possess the formidable Devil Dragon Bone armor to protect his heart like Li Yunmu. The 5 times strengthened great heart which was throbbing violently was forced to stop by that attack. Good opportunity. Li Yunmu had abundant battle experience, and he instantly grabbed this opportunity, unleashing Spirit Pincer Rip. His enormous arms swelled again to become even larger. What descendant of Barbarian King, just break for me. At this moment, Li Yunmu appeared like some sort of monster, his neck red from all the arteries suddenly popping up. The pair of enormous pincers immediately grabbed the shoulders of Mammoth Barbarian Wahang, who didn't have the slightest ability to resist, and, using his full strength, Li Yunmu fiercely pulled his hands apart. Chapter 319, change in mentality. He had grabbed this chance very quickly, without giving other a chance to react. Using spirit pincer step, he had suddenly rushed forward, so Man Tian and Coiling Tiger were a step slower than him. With the great tearing technique unleashed, Li Yunmu's pair of enormous pincers grabbed the enemy's shoulders and fiercely tore them apart. This deadly move was indeed domineering. With the combined power of Li Yunmu's formidable physical body and the 5 times strengthened heart as well as the instantaneous boost in power from spirit pincer step, his move surpassed hundreds of tons of offensive power. One of the 2 rainbow lights still present on Mammoth Barbarian Wahang's body was instantly extinguished. If it were any other person, they would have already been defeated by the power of this deadly move. Earlier, the 2 intact rainbow lights were sufficient to protect Mammoth Barbarian Wahang's body. As long as they were around, his arms wouldn't be torn. However, with this attack, Li Yunmu's own power formed only the first layer of damage. It was followed by the 8 shadows subsequently pouring their energy in the 2 pincers. Thus, when all people believed that Li Yunmu's attack couldn't possibly rip Mammoth Barbarian Wahang apart, an astonishing event happened. Once the 8 shadows used their power, the complexion of Mammoth Barbarian Wahang changed. He could clearly sense that Li Yunmu's arms possessed an enormous power against which he couldn't resist. Under it, the final body protecting rainbow light protecting him was immediately extinguished. After tearing apart his king crystal armor, the surplus energy forcibly broke through his final layer of defense, the 6th dimensional battle armor. Each of the 9 layers of energy contained at least 100 tons of tearing power, so how could Mammoth Barbarian Wahang not feel terrified in front of such destructive energy? He had never anticipated that Li Yunmu would have concealed such terrifying power. At this moment, he had no hope of escaping this tearing technique which had been used on him so suddenly. The enormous power pouring through the 2 pincers that were holding onto his shoulders completely suppressed him, to the extent that he couldn't even move a muscle. Soon, this insufferably arrogant barbarian was going to follow in Huan Baikon's footsteps, being torn in 2. Suddenly Mammoth Barbarian Wahang burst forth with astonishing will to survive and managed to fight back. This descendant of a barbarian king was worthy of his name, for surprisingly he was still searching for an opportunity to live in such dire straits. He was unable to resist the enormous force on his shoulders, so he scattered the bloodline of the battle giant. Instantly, his body returned to its previous size from the 3 meters, and this move of shrinking down saved his life. Rib. This sound which caused everyone's scalp to go numb rang out on the scene once Li Yunmu ferociously tore apart 2 strong arms from his opponent's body. A blood-curdling scream left Mammoth Barbarian Wahang's mouth. But even so, he forcefully preserved his consciousness and under the enormous pain was able to maintain his calm to kick Li Yunmu away. When he deactivated his bloodline, his strength had substantially dropped, so his kick couldn't cause any damage to Li Yunmu who was akin to human-shaped T-Rex. But using the recoil power of this kick, Mammoth Barbarian Wahang was able to quickly escape and thus saved his life. Bang! Bang! At this time, Coiling Tiger from the right and Man Tian from the left punched Li Yunmu, blasting him away. Good, it's really amusing, I'm quite delighted right now. After being blown away by the 2, Li Yunmu quickly stood back up. With his absolute defense, he was akin to a god of destruction. Seeing this, even Coiling Tiger who was usually unbridled, felt a chill run down his spine. While holding the arms of Mammoth Barbarian Wahang which were still dripping blood, Li Yunmu became thoughtful. Until then, he hadn't known the exact limit of his own strength, but after battling with the 3 barbarians, he had finally gained a clear understanding. The so-called barbarians and disciples of transcending powers were just so-so. After losing their trump cards, they had basically no ability to resist against the 9-layered power of the 8 shadows and Li Yunmu. Regardless of whatever methods they used, regardless of how many deadly moves and secret techniques they had practiced, in front of enormous power, everything was just fleeting clouds. Right then, he gained a deeper understanding regarding the absolute strength preached by the system. What was this absolute power? In the past, he had always taken an indirect route when comprehending the concept of absolute power. The true absolute power wasn't the secret techniques he practiced or the treasures or sage tools that he obtained. All of them belonged to the supporting role, or perhaps it was better to call them accessories. None of them were actually the main character. His real absolute power actually came from the shadows. That's right, only the shadows were something Li Yunmyo could truly rely on. The more shadows he possessed, the higher his absolute power would become. Everything was just this simple. At this moment, he clearly understood the reason why experience points were so precious, yet only possessed one usage, and that was congealing shadows. After all, shadows were the core product offered by the system. Since experience points could only be used to congeal more shadows, ability points were to increase his personal strength. Just possessing many shadows didn't make him formidable, because only when he increased his own strength would the strength of the shadows also increase proportionally. And currently, this was precisely the reason why Li Yunmyo had far surpassed these barbarians and disciples of transcending powers. As long as the disparity between his strength and the enemy's strength wasn't enormous, then by joining hands with his shadows, he wouldn't lose to anyone. This battle had allowed Li Yunmyo to gain a thorough understanding of the path which he had to take in the future, one that didn't need to follow conventional roads that others used. He could definitely carve out a path unique to him because the others would never possess his ability to produce shadows. He had to admit that the descendants of barbarians were very formidable, though. Originally, he believed that he would be able to kill Mammoth Barbarian Wahang with his last attack. But even after failing in his expectations, he wasn't the least bit disappointed. On the contrary, he was filled with fanatical excitement and fervor. After all, today's battle had proved to him that the descendants of barbarian kings and disciples of transcending powers who had been in front of him all this while were no longer able to suppress his rise. This one little thing had caused his consciousness to undergo an enormous transformation and gave a boost to his confidence. Come, right now, I want to use my real power. If you only have that little ability you displayed to me previously, then you proud sons and daughters of heavens are nothing more than worthless mud before me. Li Yunmyo remained standing his ground, not attacking hastily, however. After his conscience and confidence had transformed, all the apprehensions that he had toward the trump cards of the top-layer Flux disciples were swept aside. He glanced at the state of battle between Zhang Wei and Li Qinghong and coldly said, "Only if you can all decide on the price you are willing to pay for today's battle will you have the power to resist me." Chapter 320, The Situation Changes. Because of the sudden change in the battle between Li Yunmyo and the three barbarians, even Ji Wuxin and Zhang Wei's battle couldn't advance anymore. Zhang Wei swept his gaze at Mammoth Barbarian Wahang, who had lost both his arms and had a deathly pale complexion, and immediately began to panic. This was an outcome which he had never anticipated. The three descendants of barbarian kings had been battling Li Yunmyo for so long, but not only had they been unable to eliminate him, one of them had almost lost his life. A fluxer of the desolate continent had been forced to deactivate his bloodline, and that could only imply one thing. It meant that Mammoth Barbarian Wahang had lost all combat strength. Even if he still had both his arms, he would have lost all combat strength for a period of time due to forcefully deactivating his bloodline. With only Mantian and Coiling Tiger remaining behind, the battle had become even more frightening and dangerous. The most important thing that Ji Wuxin discovered was that because of increase in his confidence in this fight, Li Yunmyo seemed to have transformed into a completely different person. If the previous Li Yunmyo was like a concealed blade waiting patiently for an opportunity to strike, then the current him had already come out in the open because he didn't need to hide any longer. Because this blade felt that it could behead everyone. How can he be so formidable? Before descending to the origin world, he had only cultivated for half a year, Zhang Wei said in a daze. This was something that everyone present on the scene wanted to know. From the beginning, the six of them had been standing high above the clouds, forming all kinds of plans, giving off an aura of superiority. Regardless of whether it was Li Yunmu's absolute defense or Zihan Bei's combat strength, Man Tian and Zhang Wei had always felt that they could dominate these two. But at this instant, the situation had changed completely. There was currently a person standing calmly before them and informing them that they were weak. Moreover, when he looked at them, they could clearly see the disdain in his gaze. This sort of reversal made the six arrogant people feel extremely uncomfortable. Someone was telling them that they needed to show even more power in the past. They had always been the people who told others that you are very formidable, but regardless of whatever opportunity you have obtained, you will die. You shouldn't have used this sort of attitude in front of us. Today you will pay the price for your arrogance and die an unsightly death. Coiling Tiger said with a gloomy expression. Originally, he wasn't willing to do anything crazy. Before this, he hadn't even thought about it, because he was never someone who would sacrifice himself for others. But at this moment, for the honor of barbarian kings and to preserve everyone's life, he had to such a decision. His expression turned sinister, and he took out a pair of leg guards from his flexor badge. A bright halo surrounded them. Man Tian seemed to have sensed something and his whole person was completely shaken. Man Tian, I want you to make a promise, Coiling Tiger said with an extremely gloomy complexion. Man Tian managed to calm down himself and said, tell me. Forever treat the barbarians well. Yes, but you don't need to say anything. Being a barbarian myself, I descended to help us barbarians to advance. Then, from today onwards, this is yours. Coiling Tiger seemed to have lost his strength. Despair and disappointment covered his entire face when he threw this pair of leg guards to Man Tian. This single action implied that from then on, he had lost all ability to fight with Man Tian for the position of barbarian emperor. Zhang Wei's heart clenched, and he couldn't help but say, hegemonic deity suit. This was something completely out of his expectations. Barbarian King Coiling Dragon had surprisingly given this part of Supreme Battle suit to Coiling Tiger. Then what about the other three barbarians? He subsequently looked at Mammoth Barbarian Wang who had retreated from the battlefield. At this moment, he took out a pair of gauntlets. Yes, it was another part of hegemonic deity suit. Take this too. Mammoth Barbarian Wang kicked this pair of gauntlets toward Man Tian. In a split second, Man Tian had obtained two parts of hegemonic deity suit, and at that time, he took out the sixth-dimensional battle armor which had fused with his crystal armor. On his body, an extremely ancient battle armor two-shape barbarian battle deity armor. For a moment, Man Tian seemed to have transformed into a giant barbarian god, after adorning the three parts of the legendary supreme deity battlesuit. People like you will always remain unable to fathom what sort of foundation our barbarian shrine possesses. After adorning the three parts of hegemonic deity suit, Man Tian could clearly sense that the difference between him and the most powerful person on earth, Battle God, had been reduced once more. Currently, the only thing he needed was time to mature. Being in possession of the three parts of hegemonic deity suit, he had confidence that in the future, he would certainly surpass Battle God and become the most powerful person on earth. As for the human-shaped monster Li Yunmu standing in front of him, from this moment onwards, he no longer put him in his eyes. Regardless of how talented the enemy was or what sort of *T background the mysterious Li sect possessed, all of them weren't important. In the end, the enemy would never be able to understand what sort of unimaginable existence were the four barbarian kings who controlled the entire desolate continent. Reportedly, the four barbarian kings had entered a deity's relic and each of them obtained a part of hegemonic deity suit there. If all these parts were assembled on one person, they would become the barbarian emperor. Luo Tian, who had been guarding the transfer channel ignored by others, mumbled with a complex expression, which included both frustration and despair. On this day, he was witnessing the birth of Barbarian Emperor, the new master of Barbarian Shrine. The fact that the four barbarian kings had obtained four parts of hegemonic deity suit was actually known to everyone. However, because these parts weren't collected by a single person and none of the four barbarian kings paid allegiance to one another, No one cared about it. Yet they hadn't expected that this impossible matter would become a reality in the origin world. Under the pressure of Li Yunmu's tyrannical defense, the three barbarians had come to a unanimous decision at the most crucial moment. Man Tian had received the most benefit, and it wouldn't be the slightest exaggeration to say that he now stood at the peak of the entire desolate continent. After all, he was its future emperor, his position even higher than that of the four barbarian kings. With his overflowing talent and the three parts of hegemonic deity suit, this was something bound to happen sooner or later. From this moment on, Man Tian's status was higher compared to everyone present on the scene. People like Zhang Wei couldn't even be brought out for comparison. He wasn't a direct descendant of Battle God, and it was impossible for Battle God to give him the four parts of barbarian battle deity suit. Even Luo Tian, who belonged to the ruling power of the central continent, was overshadowed by Man Tian at this moment, because he was nothing more than one of the successors. Instantly, everyone's gaze concentrated on Man Tian's body. Li Yunmu, although I didn't want to battle you, Man Tian said calmly, but unfortunately, we belong to different sides, so today you will only go this far.